All right, guys, this is the civilian investigative panel, and they review police complaints.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, good afternoon.
This is where the director.
Mira, basta la llamamos.
So case number 23 at 001. 134. Great. So since our chair isn't here, you're our chair.
Yes. Yes, so I am Nicola Brantley and I am serving as, I'm the vice chair of the civilian investigative. Okay, so, yes, Mr. Jacobs.
Yeah, so I think everyone has already read or understood the case here in front of us. This was a case that initially went to mediation. We had essentially 3 officers, 3 sergeant-at-arms, 2 of which we were able to identify, 1 we were unable to identify. The case went through mediation. The final officer we were unable to identify with IA over numerous time periods. So that part, or that individual case, is not going to be a no finding. Ms. Jolly wanted to come and speak today to talk about the case and her experiences, so we obviously provided her the opportunity to do so. Floor is yours if you, this is our panel.
Yes, my name is Mayra Jolie. I hope all of you are familiar with what happened to me in July when I went to City Hall to be part of the community and participate. When 2 of the officers, 2 of the sergeant-at-arms that were there, according to them, they received a text from one of the commissioners telling them to get me off the seat where I was sitting in the front row in the City Hall. Unfortunately, that text is nowhere to be found. I asked for records from the police department. There are no records of that communication, and I asked for records from the city of Miami, from Commissioner King, and apparently those records are nowhere to be found either. So right now we don't know who's lying. Either the sergeant-at-arms is lying or the commissioner is lying. There was, as Mr. Jacobs said, there were 3 officers involved, and one of them, the police department claimed that is nobody. Maybe they don't know who it is. I offered to go to City Hall and sit there, the City Hall that I have not come back since I was forcibly. Excessive police force was used to get me out of the City Hall, grabbed by the arms and pushed forcibly out of the building. The 3rd officer, I exactly know what he looked like. And I offered to go to the City Hall and identify him. Mr. Jacobs said it was not necessary. Right now I found that since it was an unknown soldier, and there would be no finding. But I know exactly how that person looked, and I've been in the City Hall enough time that I can identify him. It was one of the sergeant-at-arms, but apparently, now the police department said there is nobody, and nobody else can identify it, but they could. I am before you guys because I believe the civilian investigative panel's mission is to protect people like me, single person, like the civilian. In this case, I am more than just a lay person. I'm also an attorney. I'm a public figure. I have run for commissioner. I have run for mayor of Miami. I have run for Congress. So I am less intimidated by all of these proceedings when it comes to defending what is right. In this case, it's a good effort to have the mediation portion of the CAP, but my experience has been that this mediation portion of the CAP, I think it needs a lot of work because it looks like it's catered more to protect them, in my case, to protect the sergeant-at-arms, so internal affairs investigation will not be launched against them. And I always wanted to have the opportunity to present the case in front of the panel. The mediation was offered to me, and I, as a woman that is not a believer most of the time, I welcome the opportunity to see what else can be improved. Because I do support the police department, I do support my views, but I don't support abuse. And if the abuse can be so blatantly that the same officers say you can tell whomever you want because they know nothing is gonna happen. And then I just wanted to make sure we all on the same page that either we are the civilians that need need protection, or we are the civilians that need to be taken away so they feel that they are being serviced. And that's why I'm in front of you guys. You will say, "But what is it that you want?" I don't want anything. I just want the things to be right. If we all are taxpayers, we are the ones who pay the salaries of those people who are supposed to be serving to us, being the service to the citizens, to the civilian, to the people, to the community. But when we see that those people, their position have gone to a level in which they are above any harm, they can do anything and nothing is gonna happen. The same way the Sergeant at Arms told me, you can tell whomever you want at the same time that he grabbed me and kicked me out by force from the place that belonged to me. So mediation, when the Sergeant at Arms they go there with the chip on their shoulders, and then their idea is not good faith mediation. When they are just there and from the get-go, they are giving a display of what a troublemaker this person is, and how come she's just have a vendetta because she was running for a position and she lost. Is that mediation? Is that coming in good faith to mediation? Telling somebody that every time I go to the city hall, it doesn't end well? How many times have the police been called to take me out, the uniformed police to take me out of the city hall? Not even once. The problem with this is that if they are so blatantly, they are willing to do it do it to a person like me, that maybe many people can know that I am not the type to just crawl over and then start crying. That's not me. And if I am not representing myself, I won't be able to represent anybody. And I know how mediation works. You go to mediation, everybody's in good faith. If that works fine. But I know that is your only option, even though you stop the mediation, because there is no way you can mediate with somebody under those circumstances. Aggressiveness and armed. Any questions?
Any questions for the
Yeah.
panel? Go ahead.
Yeah.
Did you just come in to make a statement, or did you want anything done with your case?
The buck stops here with you guys. If we are going to be representing the civilians, we cannot allow Sergeant at Arms to run freely and abuse people. Because verbal abuse is one thing. Physical abuse is something that cannot be mediated. And that's why I'm here. The CIP is a last stop. After this, there is nothing else, because there is no other resource. So this panel was put together for grievances like mine, not just to go through, and push papers one side and the other and then decide there is no finding. Why was there no finding? There's something that somebody was looking for to decide that there was no finding. But you guys don't know what happened in the mediation. You have no idea what happened there. So how can anybody present a case to a CIP if the first offer is the mediation, and at the time that you say, all right, the mediation is December 19th, that's it. You have no other recourse because you agreed to go to mediation. Is that something that is fair? So somebody is keeping the stuff from you guys. It's fair?
I'm not clear what you're upset about. So
Okay.
there was you came for mediation,
Yes.
they gave you a date,
Mhm.
and then
There was no
that's not,
mediation.
there was no mediation.
And then after there is no mediation,
Well, why wasn't there a mediation? There was a
It was
mediation.
2 hours and 10 minutes long, was it not?
So there was a mediation,
That sounds
and the
like-
outcome was an outcome that you weren't happy with, and this is what this is about?
no, there was no outcome because the mediation was stopped. The mediation was stopped. There was no end of mediation. The way mediation works, both parties are talking and agreeing to something. At the end, they agree to something that is either 100% or 50% for both.
And a
But
2-hour
why?
mediation?
I'm sorry?
And it was a 2-hour mediation over this incident, and you guys just didn't come, all right, well,
Because the mediation is not about the time invested in the mediation. It's not about the time invested in the time that the mediation took 2 hours, so that was successful. Everybody go home. No, it was interrupted. I stopped the mediation because there was not consensus and that was not mediation. That was microaggression, that was aggression in the name of mediation.
Yeah. So mediation
All
obviously
times.
is to give a level of understanding between the community and the police officers. Initially, the case, when it was submitted to us, it was a discourtesy complaint between at least 2 or 3 of the sergeant-at-arms. As I mentioned before, IA provided us a lineup of all the sergeant-at-arms. I provided those faces and individuals to Ms. Jolly to identify the 3rd officer. She told me that that wasn't any of them. She said that she would go, I believe, to City Hall to find the person. I initially told her, hey, don't put yourself into a place where it was traumatic for you. Let's see if we can find who.
No.
I initially told you you don't need to go to City Hall. Is that not accurate?
Yeah, you say not to go to City
Right.
Hall because I was too busy. I was
Okay.
a busy
So
person not to
that's what I'm
attend.
saying. That's what I'm
It's
saying.
not about trauma because
Okay.
it's
All right.
not the truth.
I'm not
No, he didn't interrupt you.
I-
He let you speak.
I'm not trying to interrupt.
So please don't interrupt him.
All I'm saying is that I told you not to go. We were going to provide pictures so that you could identify the sergeant-at-arms that were at City Hall at the time. I provided those pictures to you. You told me that none of those officers are the 3rd officer. And then you offered to go again. I told you if you can find them, so be it. You would have to open up another complaint if it doesn't arise from discourtesy. But the basis of your initial complaint, that operative nucleus of fact that arose from this incident, has been mediated. That issue has been mediated with at least 2 other officers. Now, if you have a 3rd complaint and it arises out of a different incident with Sergeant-at-Arms, feel free to submit that as a complaint. As we explained mediation on the onset, it is a program that is confidential, and in that confidentiality, it allows for both people to go into a space with 2 trained mediators to talk about what occurred. I explained to you before the mediation, during the mediation, and after the mediation that this will happen in lieu of a traditional investigation. You agreed to those terms. And I understand that it may not have ended the way you would have hoped, and I think you do bring up a lot of good aspects to improve our mediation program. But at the end of the day, this allows us to not only gauge our program, but also ensure the officers show up underneath the confines of the policy. And so this is why right now, at least as it relates to these 2 officers that you mediated with, it would be a no finding at this point. But I wanted to provide you the ability to speak to the panel.
May I correct? It's not, you say discourtesy?
The initial complaint, yes, that you filed.
Discourtesy?
Yes, you had filed a complaint in our office that you were upset about how the officers yelled at you and talked to you at City Hall. And then you made another complaint about an unknown officer who threw you out of the building. And you provided a video.
No.
You made 2 complaints.
I mean, no.
You only made 1 complaint.
The complaint about the mediation occurred with one of the officers who was the one who forcibly used excessive force and physically pushed me out of the building, grabbing me by the arm
Okay.
and pushing me out of the building.
So who's the 3rd officer, Ms. Johnson?
The 3rd officer is the one that I offered to go to the City Hall, and you say, don't do it because you will ask for the roster. Then after you said it was, nobody could find that 3rd officer, you said, we're gonna decide no finding because there is an unknown officer. You didn't, I offered to go identify it so I can say the name.
Yes.
And you said,
I-
you're gonna decide it, you're gonna recommend a no finding.
Mhm.
You don't want me to identify the 3rd guy.
I do. I actually told you in the email that after we provided the lineup of the photos, that in which you said none of those are the officers. I said, unless you can identify them, and you said you could, and you didn't provide any names, it would be recommended from the staff and no finding to the panel.
Correct, what you said is gonna be recommended for the staff and no finding,
Right.
and you cannot bring that up again. So at what time,
can't
at
bring
what,
it up again.
you
What do you
can,
mean?
you say I couldn't bring that issue up again.
Right,
Mediation.
because of the mediation, correct, right.
No, even with the third guy, even if I identify him.
It-
And if you already said there's gonna be a meeting in which you're gonna,
But you weren't
it's
able
gonna be
to,
enough.
you weren't able to identify the third person.
Mr. Jacobs, you already said there's gonna be a meeting about no finding.
Correct.
So what,
Because we spent 3 months trying to identify the third officer, Michelle, if I can recall, to include a police lineup of photos of all the sergeant at arms that were at City Hall at the time. That 3-month investigation to find the officer yielded no results.
okay,
So I don't know what else you want from me at this point. I
no,
suppose.
absolutely nothing. What I
Okay.
wanted is to go myself and
And
identify
I
the
said, go
officer.
feel free. I mean,
Feel
I can't
free,
restrict you.
Feel free, and at the meantime, you said, I'm just gonna recommend no finding. So
Right.
while I'm finding the guy, you're recommending no finding to the CIP panel? So
Right.
why should I
But
go identify?
when-
You already told
When
me.
did I, so we only have 6 months to investigate a case. I told you early April when the meeting would be scheduled, as well as provided you the photos, I believe, middle to at the end of March. There was ample time to identify the sergeant at
The
arms.
sergeant, the one that you told me, I will do it. Don't,
So,
you tell me.
this is
Mr.
becoming
Lee,
circular.
I thank you so much for coming. I don't wanna cut you off, but we do have lots of cases, and I wanna make sure that there's no one on the panel who has another question from you since you did take the time to come here. So is there anyone else who might have a question for Ms. Jolie? Okay, because at this point, it is where we are unless there's a new complaint, there's not anything we can do, because the policy of the panel is to, if there's mediation, we don't see the case. So if there's something new, then I guess we would have to address that, but
Go ahead,
yes.
I was just gonna point out, if Ms. Charlie is able to identify who the third officer is, she could file a complaint against that officer. So the no finding is being closed out as to the two that you mediated against, or mediated with, sorry. It's not being closed out as to the unknown, unnamed third officer. So if that person is able to be identified, that's not impacted by this.
Okay, according to what Mr. Jacobs told me, even if I identify the officer, if arose out of the same situation, it would be a no finding. Am I wrong?
But our
That's
attorney's
correct.
just saying now that that's not the case, so
Okay, perfect.
that understanding is that if you are able to identify that person, you can go ahead and bring another complaint.
Yeah, and now I would point out, there is a time limit built into the statute that the city created the CIP, so it has to, you would have to bring the complaint within a year of the event taking place. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that, so you know what the time frame is for filing a complaint against an officer through the CIP. And that's built into the city code that, as to how the statute of limitations the city wanted to create when it created the CIP.
So the 6 months that you talk about, Mr. Jacobs, was about what?
180 days is the
What you
statute that he's talking about.
No, to investigate a complaint, we have 180 days. Mr. Quick is telling you from the date of incident, you can file a complaint up to a year. It looks like the date of incident
July.
was July 28th
Yeah.
of last year. So
And that's
you
why I
have-
wanted to point that out, because obviously it's April now, so there's
that's
a
right.
couple of months. But
That's right.
yeah, the 6 months that Mr. Japes was referring to is that once a complaint gets filed, if it's directly filed with the CIP has 180 days to complete it. If it doesn't complete it within the 180 days, and it's not told for certain reasons related to like state attorney investigations, things like that, it automatically becomes a no finding. So that's the 6 months he was referring to there.
Understood.
Thank you so much for your time and for
Thank
coming
you.
here. Have a good evening.
Bye.
All right, so we'll take the first case.
I think there may be a complainant here. Let me go see if she stayed. She was debating, so. let me-
I have a question.
Public comment, there'll be time for public comment.
Who appointed you people?
There'll be time for public comment. There's a specific time for public comment, and you will be
We have
available
to do
to
our
have.
cases now.
Okay, what's the role of this body?
Sir, public comment is available for you at the end.
I need to file a complaint on you.
Thank you.
But do we know who the complainant is?
To file a complaint?
Yeah.
You're trespassing me?
It's gonna be Martha
Nobody's
Arias.
trespassing.
I want to file a complaint on him
You
too.
need to, this is the time for the CIP to engage.
He started talking to me.
Sir, you need to sit down, let the CIP conduct its business. This is a limited public forum, and the government needs to conduct its business during that time frame. you are able to attend. This is an open public meeting. You are able to attend. And you are also able to speak at public comment during the time set aside during public comment. So once that time is available, you are more than welcome to speak.
Okay, we can just go in order.
Thank you. So in order, the first case,
Yeah, so the first complainant is Stephanie Fenton. Fenton, CIP number 22-062. Officers involved is Derek Charles, and allegations are excessive force and misconduct.
Pages 125.
Thank you. Ms. Fenton alleged that Officer Charles was extremely rough during her arrest, which caused her to suffer bruising on both her wrists. And she is also alleging that during the process of being handcuffed with her hands behind her back, Officer Charles fondled her buttocks area over her clothing. The arrest affidavit was reviewed, and Club 11's security approached Officer Charles and actually initiated the interaction between Ms. Fenton and himself because she was causing a disturbance and she was asked to leave the property several times. Officer Charles gave her multiple commands to leave, but she refused, and therefore she was arrested and transported to TGK. UWC was captured the whole incident, and there is a point where Officer Charles is handcuffing her behind her back, and then he actually has to fix the handcuffs because her purse was actually attached to her arm. And that's where she says, you know, don't touch my butt. And he says, I'm trying to remove the handcuffs to correct it. You see all that in BWC. So in terms of his interaction with Ms. Fenton, it's captured in its entirety. You saw in the BWC that Ms. Fenton was actually trespassed from Club 11. Officer Charles acted in accordance with departmental orders. So in terms of the allegations of excessive force and misconduct, staff recommends an exoneration.
all right, thank you. So are there any questions? I'm sure you all saw the body worn camera and the pictures. Any questions? All right.
She's not in the lobby, she's not in the bathrooms. Last I saw her, she was.
The complaint's not here?
in the bathroom.
All right, so there, you have
Do we have a quorum?
Yes.
with Russell, yes, you do. All right, so do I have a vote?
Motion to accept staff's recommendation.
So I have a motion, a second by Amir. All those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you.
Okay, next case, complainant Martha Arias. We're going in order, so it should be the next case. CIP number 22-346. Officers involved are Michael Bloom and Adam Hupel. Allegation against Bloom is discourteous and improper procedure. Allegation against Hupel is improper procedure. Ms. Arias, who was here earlier, but we checked outside and checked the bathrooms, and she appears to have left.
You know what, just in case she may return, do we want to do another one just so that she has a chance if she is around?
Okay,
We want to hear
we
from
can
her?
do
Okay.
Okay,
Is
so
that
we'll,
okay with the panel? All right, thank you.
okay, so we'll skip over Martha Arias real quick and see if she comes back. Next case then is City of Miami, so it's the third case. 22-353. City of Miami is the complainant. Everyone's there. Officer Joanne Longono, allegation is improper procedure. So this incident was an internal complaint. Basically a screenshot of an unknown female was provided to IA Major Diaz. A female posing inappropriately in front of a marked city police vehicle. The vehicle was later identified to being assigned to Officer Longono. The photo in question was basically an Instagram model that has reportedly had previous issues with posing in front of public buildings like fire departments and things of that nature. That was already being investigated by ACA Panoff, and that's why it was brought to the attention of IA. According to the report, the officer was there. He parked in a public area with his vehicle because there was a bomb threat at Whole Foods. So he was dealing with the bomb threat the whole time. His vehicle was outside in a public area, and that's when the photo occurred. In terms of policy and procedures, Officer Longono, it does not show any connection to him at all. It wasn't posted on his social media. It wasn't, there is no link or anything that indicates any association between this female and Officer Longono. So it was in accordance with, he followed social media policy and in terms of.
I'll get another computer.
Here you go, Steve. The tablet.
Yes,
That's it. You have it.
Okay, well, I have another one. Here's me.
Just in case. All right, thank you, go ahead.
Okay, so another, the City of Miami case, the internal complaint. So basically, in accordance with the social media policy, Officer Gonzalez cannot violate anything. So in terms of the allegation of improper procedure, stops recommending exoneration.
Yes. All right, are there any questions?
No, good, and I'm
Yes.
assuming that this sticky was not on the original photo, right?
No, that's the photo that was provided to me by A. They put a little sticky
To
over
protect
the female's
Scene.
rear end
Okay.
to not make it obscene, but yes.
So this is basically a model that took it upon herself to take a photo in front of her.
Yes, and her social media, we reviewed it, and it's her MO. All the other photos were very risque, there's nudity involved, so it is something that she has been known to do for likes and followers. Yes, that's how the investigation with the attorneys originally started. She was actually posing in front of fire departments and city buildings, half naked,
That's her.
and posting it, yes.
That's her thing.
No
All
problem.
right.
This came from Stephanie Panoff, the city attorney. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Do I have a motion? Motion to accept staff recommendations.
Second.
All those in favor? Any
Yeah.
opposed?
We're gonna wait for Arias to the end, so I'm gonna go ahead with the next case, which is CIP case 22328. It's anonymous complainant against Maximiliano Valdez, 27081, for improper procedure and discourtesy. The anonymous complainant alleged Sergeant Valdez was extremely aggressive, pushing people with a crowbar and screaming profanities at the Soho house parties in Wentworth. I included in the packet,
I can't hear the lady. I'm here for the meeting, please. I'm trying to hear the.
We are too, and I think you're more disruptive. Go ahead, Betsy, thank you.
no problem, I sent you guys the clip of the body worn camera that Officer Sergeant Valdez had. He had a camera and he recorded the incident. In it, you can see him consulting with Sergeant Marin, who was a bike patrol officer. Apparently, there was an event that they were working and they had sold more tickets than they had room to accommodate. And so at this point, they were telling people that they weren't going in, that it was closed down, and they were trying to push them back so that they could have a path for the people if they needed to leave. So in it, Sergeant Valdez was everything but discourteous, please and thank yous, ma'ams. At the beginning, he wasn't explaining anything. When people were asking questions, he was just saying, I need to clear this area, please move back, sir, ma'am. At a certain point, you can see on his body on camera, he closes his ass. So the thing that was called a crowbar was probably his ass. I didn't see anything else in his hands. He wasn't swinging it. I couldn't see it, so he must have just been carrying it. And then once they got the crowd back, he started answering questions to the crowd, people that were asking him, well, is anybody gonna get to go in, and how do we get our money back? And he was answering as many questions as he could. So, we found that Sergeant Valdez worked together well with the other officers and security in order to close an event that was filled over capacity. During his efforts, he was polite, consistent, and efficient. Sergeant Valdez did not use profane language and was observed effectively using his expandable baton, not a crowbar, when dealing with the crowd. So we recommend the improper procedure and discourtesy be closed as exonerated.
I know we had a lot of BWC to look at, so thank you for all of that. So I know you all watched it. Are there questions? Oh. No, keep going. So are there any questions? I know we read through everything. Are there any questions from the panel? Okay, all right. Do I have a motion? Motion to accept staff recommendations. Do I have a second? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, next case. Thank you.
Okay, the next case, we're gonna continue in order, is 22360. The complainant is Juan Echeverria. The principal officer is Darren Brown, 27063, for excessive force, 2 improper procedures, and a discourtesy. Mr. Echeverria, alleged Sergeant Brown, approached his vehicle, knocked on his driver's window, and stated, "Oh, now you saw me, you're gonna act crazy." Then told him, "You need to pay for a parking space. You need to pay to park in front of me." Mr. Echeverria further alleged that Sergeant Brown yelled at him, threw him on the ground, and arrested him for no reason. When he asked for a supervisor, Sergeant Brown stated, "I am the supervisor." So, because I attempted unsuccessfully to get in touch with Mr. Echeverria, so pursuant to our ordinance, everything but the excessive force, we're gonna recommend be closed as no finding because he didn't cooperate with our investigation. I didn't have a lot to go on because the Sergeant Brown, did not have a body-worn camera at this time, so the whole beginning of the incident wasn't captured on body-worn camera. The only body-worn camera that captured it was after the fact, after he was already in custody when backup officers started to arrive. So, you can see in the section B body-worn camera that all the footage occurred after what happened. So as far as Sergeant Brown, with the discourtesy and two improper procedures, we're recommending it be closed as no finding. And as far as the excessive force, we can't prove it or disprove it without witnesses or body-worn camera, so we're recommending a not sustained.
And Mr. Echeverria is not coming forth as a witness to give us his statement, so we could have more.
He didn't respond to any attempts I made to contact him.
Yeah, that's usually what's helpful, right? Other questions from the panel? Okay, do I have a vote? A motion? Motion to accept staff recommendation. I second it. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
I love Mika being the chair.
I'm just like passing on the baton, just sitting back and relaxing.
Yeah, right. That's how relaxing.
It's a stressful meeting.
Okay, so the next one is gonna be 22-322. The complainant is the city of Miami. It's an admin case. There's two principal officers, Joseph Kennedy, 3593 for missing proper and improper procedure, and Jose Pereira, 44928, also for improper procedure and missing property. So, Mr. Hippolyte was arrested, and following his arrest, once he got to the station, he was alleging that $2,000 in US currency was missing from his person. So basically what happened was Marine Patrol pulled over some people on a watercraft, the jet ski kind of thing, and they didn't have any of the paperwork or safety instructions or anything on it. So the Marine Patrol followed them back to the docks and found out that the person that had rented them the watercrafts didn't have the proper licensing with the city of Miami to be doing it. Apparently it's a problem at this dock, a lot. So they found out that Mr. Hippolyte was the one that had rented the watercraft to them. So they arrested him, and in the process of the pat down, Officer Kennedy, who was the Marine Patrol officer, found in front of another officer $2,000 on his person. Officer Kennedy counted it out in front of Mr. Hippolyte and another officer and put it back into Mr. Hippolyte's pocket, and then went and told the officer who was filling out the arrest affidavit he has $2,000 in cash in these denominations, and it was ultimately written on the arrest affidavit.
By the Marine officer.
By the Marine officer who was writing the arrest affidavit. So in staff's opinion, when it was written into the arrest affidavit, the denominations and how much money it was, that has now become evidence in that arrest affidavit and in the charges. So they called for a transport officer. Officer Pereira arrived. You can see on body-worn camera when Mr. Hippolyte is moved from one police car to the other. Officer Kennedy tells him he's got $2,000 in his pocket. We're not touching it. We're not taking it out. Officer Pereira took that as we, all of us, when Officer Kennedy said he meant as him or Marine Patrol, that they were done with the cash in his pocket. So Officer Pereira did not count it, put him in the back, handcuffed in the back of his car. He was eventually transported to the station, and when they asked for the cash, he says, I don't know where it is. Now, he also had a friend there that he was calling his brother, and there was some back and forth about when, that the officer, one or both, may have allowed this brother to come to the car to talk to Mr. Hippolyte. The thing is, though, on Officer Pereira's body-worn camera, Mr. Hippolyte is heard saying that he still had the money. So that kind of clears it for Officer Kennedy, because Mr. Hippolyte on body-worn camera is now saying that he still has it while he's in Officer Pereira's car. So I reviewed a lot of body-worn camera footage. It's in there for you. As far as Officer Kennedy, while sitting in the backseat of Officer Pereira's police car, Mr. Hippolyte asked him, can I give my money and stuff out of my pocket? This statement appears to show, this was on Officer Pereira's camera, appears to show that Mr. Hippolyte still was in possession of his $2,000 after custody and control was transferred from Officer Kennedy to Officer Pereira. So we're recommending, as far as the missing property, to exonerate Officer Kennedy based on this statement.
And so to make sure everybody's clear, we have the two officers, Kennedy, who's the Marine officer, Pereira, who is the transport. So for Officer Kennedy, what Betsy is saying is the missing property allegations to be exonerated because he counted the money, put it in the arrest affidavit, put it back in the gentleman's pocket. The improper procedure is for not.
For,
I'm confused about that.
That's why I wanted to
Okay.
go through the steps to make sure we were all clear.
Okay, so the missing property, we're recommending exonerated because
He put it
once
down.
he was in Officer Pereira's car, he stated he still had his possessions.
Yes.
As far as the improper procedure, the $2,000 cash was written out on the arrest affidavit
Yes.
indicating that it was evidence. However,
He
it
did
was
not.
not impounded as evidence, it was tucked back into his pocket and ultimately lost someplace in between. So we're saying that that cash should have been impounded or at least processed as evidence.
But wasn't it the responsibility of the second officer to do the arrest and the time?
You tell me.
Major?
Yes, Internal Affairs did substantiate improper procedure in the second officer, because when you take possession of a prisoner, you're supposed to search that prisoner.
Okay, but this is the
This
evidence,
is for
the
the-
cash evidence,
Correct,
that it
which
should
was-
have been impounded as evidence.
Right, Marine Patrol, since they're out in the water, that's a little difficult for them to do, so then when the responding officer comes for transport, not only do they transport, they're also supposed to turn that evidence into property.
But it got
Why
lost
would-
in the process
why
because
did
they
you
put
count
it back in
I'm
the,
sorry?
Why would the Marine Patrol officer count it? Like, what's the point of that?
The
Because if
point
it
is for
doesn't-
transparency, to show them body worn camera, look, you have $2,000 and count in front of them. So he sees that there's no discrepancies, there's $2,000, right? Yes, there's $2,000.
And then he puts it back in his
And puts
pocket.
it back, and then the transporting officer's supposed to search them again.
in staff's opinion, it should have been put separately. It's evidence. It should have been crammed back into his pocket.
Okay,
Because
but if the
that's-
procedure is to put it back in the pocket for the second
Well,
officer.
that's my
That's not
question.
the
Is it a
procedure.
policy or is it just a practice, Major?
It's, the procedure is for the transporting officer who's gonna take over the prisoner, is for them to turn it into property. Now, not to, he was supposed to then search the officer, take the evidence or personal artifacts, put it inside an envelope, and then transport it.
So I have a question. The first officer that arrived and counted the money and put it back in his pocket. Was the proper procedure to put it back in his pocket? Is that the only option that he had, or is it procedure to do something
No,
else?
he did it when, since they're Marine Patrol, they restricted based on the vote. So when he called for transport and an officer for backup, when that officer got there, he did tell the officer he has $2,000 in his pocket, basically telling him the evidence is
Check
there, so the officer should have then searched him taken the money,
He
taken
never
anything.
called it evidence
So
though,
the first
ever.
officer should probably be exonerated on that then.
He never called it evidence, in my opinion, and I couldn't find a DO on it, so it's out of the training, the Florida Basic Recruit Training Program. Evidence is treated differently than just, $10 that you stick back in someone's pocket. In this case, it never made it to the station to be collected as evidence because it disappeared someplace between Officer Pereira's car and the station when they got there and asked for it, which was pretty soon after they got there. So my point being that had it been taken away from him, written into the A form like it was, and then put in a bag or a plastic bag or even handed to the officer and said, this is evidence, we wouldn't be sitting here right now debating it.
So I think we're gonna take it one by one, just because I know I hear rumblings, but let's do the first motion. So is there a motion to exonerate Officer Kennedy on the missing property? That's the first one where Betsy said he took it out, he recorded and everything.
Motion to, I motion to exonerate.
Okay, is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Is there a motion for the allegation of improper procedure?
I move to sustain.
You move to sustain? Okay, is there a second?
We're gonna have some discussion.
Okay.
just to clarify a few points.
Sure.
Then I'll take my motion.
No, no.
I can?
Yeah, you can leave it if there's a
It's
second
there.
and you can still have
Oh,
discussion.
there's a second, I didn't know.
Yes, yeah.
Who was the second?
Russell?
Russell, yeah.
I just want to clarify the timeline. So Kennedy sees the money, puts it back in back into the claimant's pocket. Pereira now takes over the claim, right? At what point does the brother come into the picture? In between Kennedy and Pereira or after Pereira?
The brother was there the whole time, but he started moving.
Actually, what I'm going to say to clarify, at what point does the brother actually have access and comes in here?
He's in the
When he's in
transport
the-
car, right? He's in the car.
Right,
But there's,
in Pereira's car.
In Pereira's car, okay. So, does Pereira, ever record the money at all? Like he says he never saw it, or does he say, I thought it was Kennedy?
He said, because Kennedy said, there's $2,000 in the pocket, we've counted it, we're not touching it, that meant him, that he shouldn't touch it either. But to my recollection, there was no statement about the $2,000 in his pocket is evidence, so make sure you impound it, or, anything like that. It was just tucked back in his pocket, and by the time they got back, who knows what Officer Pereira would have done, but the money was gone.
other types of evidence would have been put back on him either, right?
Right.
Other things.
If it was
So
drugs or something.
That's what I'm thinking, like
Yeah.
there is I hear about the procedure, but there is still a misstep, I think.
And
So-
there was Marine Patrol vehicles also on the scene. There was a lot of people on the scene from almost the beginning on.
Betsy, what was your comment about, like, let's say that you had $20? Okay. Was that still have been evidence?
If it was written on the arrest affidavit, yes.
I mean, he's renting vehicles, right, on
And
the
there-
water, so to me, any money would be
Yes,
evidence.
Yes, it's proceeds from what he was.
From the illegal.
From the illegal.
Yeah, I think it depends on what he was being arrested for. So in this case, it had to do with the illegal renting, whereas if it was just like intoxicated in public, the fact that he randomly had money in his pocket, I don't think
So then
would
that's
be
why
evidence
the
of
money
that.
is evidence, because of the nature of okay, gotcha.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor to sustain the improper procedure against Officer Kennedy, which is the Marine officer.
Exonerate Kennedy, is what you meant.
No, we
No,
have
she
to
does it.
sustain,
She does it.
so you have to
I
decide how you're gonna
Roll
vote.
call.
So all those in
And
favor?
Russell seconded for no.
Yes. And Russell seconded. So all those in favor, say aye. So that's,
All opposed? Let's do it. Just so I can have a record of it. Yeah, with the roll call. And since you're acting chair. Trinice Bryan?
I have to abstain because I wasn't here in the conversation.
Oh, okay. Is it?
Yeah, she just.
Okay. Mike Gonzalez?
Yes.
Mayor Kenyatta? Yes. Russell Motley?
Yes.
Stephen Everett?
Yes.
Michelle Wilson? No. Joey Rinaldi? No Rojas. David Brantley.
Yes.
Passes.
Motion passes.
All right, so now we're gonna go to,
Officer Pereira,
huh?
the next officer?
Yeah, it's Officer Pereira. Based on Mr. Hippolyte's request to see in a body worn camera, it appears that the $2,000 US currency was still on his person after Officer Pereira took care and custody of him. Staff cannot prove or disprove what happened to the money and recommends the allegation of missing property against Officer Pereira be closed as not sustained. And the reason for that is it may have, my guess is it went to the brother, but I don't know. I can't prove it.
So we are taking this one by one, so that's to not sustain the missing property, or is there a motion for the missing property against Officer Pereira?
I don't think it can be exonerated because it disappeared in his custody, but we don't know how it disappeared.
We're supposing.
No.
No, so no. Is there a motion on?
There's been no motion.
I move to accept staff's recommendation.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay.
Who was
And
the
then-
second? I'm sorry.
Joe.
And then as far as the improper procedure, Officer Pereira failed to pat down Mr. Hippolyte when he took control and custody of him and placed him in the backseat of his patrol car. This is what Major Diaz was talking about that I also sustained. We're recommending an improper procedure be sustained.
So do I have a motion on the improper procedure against?
I move to accept staff's recommendation.
Do I have a second? Oh, Michelle was the second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, next case.
Mike.
Okay, the next case is gonna be CIP case number 21-324. 21-324. Complainant is Yannicka Edmonds.
Hold on. We're checking to see if the complainant came.
Yeah, I'm just checking.
She
since
was
she-
asking me questions and asked if she had to be there, so.
I'm sure there was a lot that could have also been very
Yes.
distressing.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, so okay, so the complainant is Yannicka Edmonds. The principal officers were the SWAT team and the robbery unit, and the allegation was missing property. Ms. Edmonds alleged that several city of Miami police, SWAT officers and robbery detectives entered her home and stole $1,500 in U.S. currency. This case was extended because there were pending criminal charges that since have been resolved. We contacted Ms. Yannicka Edmonds, and she stated she didn't want anything further involvement with this case. But due to the nature of the allegations, we decided to continue on with the investigation. We pulled the body-worn camera footage. As you know, any footage that occurs inside of a residence is redacted. So the footage is heavily redacted. It basically shows the SWAT team making entry into the residence, taking their positions on outside. Once they enter the residence, again, the footage would be redacted. The officers from the robbery unit are not assigned body-worn cameras, so there would be no footage from those officers. The footage shows that several officers from SWAT entered the residence briefly to ensure no one was hiding inside. Several robbery detectives searched the residence. Excuse me. The sergeant stated that he located an unknown amount of currency, which was not seized because they didn't believe it was of any evidentiary value. Again, the body-worn footage was redacted, or there is no BWC assigned. Staff recommends the allegations of missing property be closed as not sustained because there's insufficient evidence to prove or disprove the allegation.
Yeah, we looked at the BWC in complaints committee, and it is heavily redacted. It is very difficult to see things because it's in their home. So, are any comments, questions from the panel? So, motion?
Motion to accept staff's recommendation.
All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next case is going to be CIP case number 23-007. 23-007. The complainant was the city of Miami, and the officer involved was Sergeant Antonio Fernandez. The allegation was excessive force. The story behind this is Officer Fernandez and I believe it was Officer Klein responded to a landlord-tenant, what amounted to a landlord-tenant dispute. Officer Sergeant Fernandez went up to the resident to speak to the male who was inside the residence. And during the conversation, the male sputum came from his mouth and landed on Sergeant Fernandez's face. Sergeant Fernandez alleges that the male spit on him, and he admits that he grabbed the male by the neck, and he said in an effort to turn his head so that he would not be spat upon again. The lieutenant ordered Sergeant Fernandez to unarrest the subject, Mr. Walker. Excuse me, and Mr. Walker, in the BWC, you can see when Sergeant Fernandez says, "You spit on me," he immediately says, "I didn't intend to. It was unintentional." He tried to explain himself that because he had
I have the body worn camera. I have the body worn for this incident.
There's the BWC again is redacted because it shows the inside of the residence. It's basically audio. If you wanted to hear that, it's queued up. So staff recommendation is that Sergeant Fernandez admitted that he instinctively reached forward and pushed Mr. Walker back by the neck when he felt spit on his face. His intent was to push his face away, to turn him away so he would not be spat upon again. Additionally, Sergeant Fernandez justified the force by saying that he never squeezed Mr. Walker's neck, or nor did he choke him. Staff recommends the allegation of excessive force be closed as sustained.
Right. Question is, please, Mr. Rinaldi, we had great conversation and slow viewing of the BWC. So
I thought this one, the redaction was a little excessive. They're at the doorway of the apartment. You don't really see anything, or could possibly see anything inside. I think the redaction was a little unnecessary, but even what we could see was clearly excessive.
absolutely, absolutely. Is there questions, comments? Do you all have seen it from the panel?
Is this the one that happened in the hallway?
Yes.
Yeah, outside the
Yes.
on the catwalk.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I remember that one.
Yes. And okay. I wasn't saying anything else. Motion to accept staff recommendations. A second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Thank you. Very well.
The next case is CIP case number 23-010. The complainant is the city of Miami. The officer involved was Miguel Mercado. The story with this is Officer Mercado ordered his wife ordered groceries from Instacart. The Instacart driver arrived, parked on the driveway, which Officer Mercado said had been freshly paved. There was a dispute between the Instacart driver and Officer Mercado. Officer Mercado provided his home surveillance video to Internal Affairs. However, they would not provide that to us. Allegedly, the video shows that the Instacart driver, after the dispute between he and Officer Mercado, threw the groceries onto the driveway and then approached Officer Mercado, at which time Officer Mercado struck him. This was investigated by Miami-Dade PD, and they referred the other party to the state attorney's office. So, staff's recommendations, according to the IA report, the surveillance video provided by Officer Mercado depicts the driver throwing the groceries ordered by Officer Mercado's wife onto the lawn and then approaching Officer Mercado. Officer Mercado stated that he feared the driver was going to cause him bodily harm, so he then defended himself by striking the driver while in front of his residence. So we reviewed the stand your ground statute, and the statute basically says that you have no duty to retreat, and you can stand your ground. You can use non-deadly force against another when, to the extent the person reasonably believes that such conduct is necessary to defend himself, him or herself, okay, or against the other's imminent use of unlawful force. So if Officer reasonably believed that he was in danger of bodily harm, he was justified in using non-deadly force. So staff recommends that allegation of misconduct be closed as not sustained.
Let's do one by one, Mr. Rinaldi.
Okay.
Do you want to share the conversation you had at complaints committee with us?
Yeah. So this is one where we feel we should have been, as our panel, be entitled to see the surveillance footage. I know it's particular with a police officer's home, we don't want anyone being able to see the identity of an officer's home or ever be able to know where they reside. But there are protections that could be in place that would allow us as the panel, as part of the city of Miami, to review the video. We can all watch it at the office. We don't have to receive copies of it. There are lots of ways in which the protections in place could be protected while still allowing us to do our job.
Yes.
I want to, just for the record, post an opposing view to that. I don't think we should have that video. If the person who owns that video didn't want us to have it. If they're going to be giving that video to the police department for an investigation, they're not thinking, oh, is this going to someday be, in a panel, a civilian investigative panel, and have civilians looking at my video of my house, even if it is in the office, even if it's not going to be disseminated to the public. I don't agree with that. I just want to put that out there. For the record.
You're saying it might discourage future cooperation?
Absolutely, absolutely, it would definitely discourage it for me. I think that, if the person does not want us to have that video, we shouldn't have it at all.
But it's the officer, so.
It doesn't matter. If the person who owns that video, if it's in their house, doesn't want us to have it, we shouldn't have it. Now, if it's on body-worn camera, that's another thing. I understand there's some redactions. Body-worn camera, they're calling the police. That's a different story. But their own surveillance video.
I gotta give credit to Officer McCartney because he didn't have to give it to them.
He didn't have to give it to them.
Give it to anybody.
But he also probably didn't intend for that video to someday be at a civilian investigative panel, have civilians, even if they are coming to the office and review it, privately, outside the view of the public.
Any other comment?
I have a question. Can we investigate an officer who's not on duty? This officer was not on duty.
Yeah, we just on or off duty.
Okay.
There's actually police officers.
Yeah,
Other comments, questions?
Just to clarify, once the officer gives up the body-worn camera footage to the police department, it becomes a public record underneath confidentiality and certain exemptions. So even though, to your point, which I think is well placed, that he may not have known that it will come to a civilian investigative panel, it's still a public record, although there is some protections there.
No, I fully understand that.
Okay.
And I think that a record that goes, that's a public, that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But as a body, we can make our own rules as a body. And as a body, I don't think we should be doing that.
Thank you for that. Other comments, questions? The second thing was about, Mike, can you took that improper procedure?
The second allegation, Officer McCarter was contacted by Miami-Dade PD regarding his being the subject of a criminal investigation. We searched the departmental orders and found nothing that would require him to inform anyone in his chain of command that he was the subject of criminal investigation. There is a DA on courts, on reporting court stuff, but that pertains to him being arrested or having court action against him. In this case, he was not arrested and there is no court action against him. So he did not have to notify anyone in his chain of command. So staff is listing that allegation of improper procedure as a policy failure.
I have a question for the major. I understand that our investigators are saying there wasn't a DO, but what is the practice when that happens? So if an off-duty officer has a contact with another law enforcement agency, I find it hard to believe that there's no sort of practice in place. How does that work?
The wonderful thing under my section now, when they put professional compliance under internal affairs, when we see policy violations, I have them line next door and start initiating, to start closing those gaps in policy failures. So we instituted a form that when we see a policy violation, we write it up, the investigator, and then to change the policy to make it better. It's a living document, it's always for improvement, and based on situations like this, we found there was a hole in the policy, so what we call policy violations. Now, there is something that we call self-disclosures that our officers do whenever they feel that their supervisor, the department should know of. They write a memo to me, indicating whatever interactions that they had. I get those quite a lot as well.
But that's at their own discretion, that's
Yes,
not.
unless within the policy that they're supposed to.
But I think that there might be the sense that that is a hole, that's a problem. So that if there is some sort of case that may come up in another jurisdiction, I think it's important that the city is aware of that with the
Absolutely.
officers. I mean, any license, you would have to say, in order to maintain my license, if there's some sort of litigation or something coming my way, I need to inform the governing body. So we're seeing it as a whole here.
Yes, and we patched it up because we have that in place of policy failures, and then we addressed it.
But it's not up to their discretion. This is.
I don't think you made the policy yet.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Yes, once we change the policy, it's not a discretionary
Okay.
situation anymore.
So Major, any police contact they have off duty, they're required to report it.
If it's
What's under the new policy?
under the new policy, any interactions with law enforcement of an investigative nature, then yes, they have to report it.
The mayor?
So right now, if a city of Miami officer is off duty, hanging out in Doral or something, and they get stopped for disorderly conduct, but there's not an arrest, right now, they don't have to report that.
Correct.
Okay. And so at some point, I imagine soon, there will be a new policy updating that conduct. That policy will go to our policy committee at some point for review, and then it will take effect. I imagine in a few months, hopefully.
Thanks, Major.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, so do I have a motion?
Motion to accept staff recommendations.
Is that for both? 1 and 2? Okay.
Second. All those in favor? Any opposed? All right, thank you. Now, did we see if that complaint is here?
Yeah, so I don't know if we want to check right now.
I'll check one more time. She wasn't there when I went before.
And that would be our.
Martha Arias is the last case, so it was the second case on the docket, CIP 22-346. So we checked multiple times outside and she doesn't seem to be here, even though she was here earlier.
Oh, I guess while we're checking, I can move the director's reviews and then no findings. Let's do it first and second.
No.
Oh, she's not there?
Yeah, no.
Okay, so then let's go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So Martha Arias, just for the record, we checked, she's not there, she's not ready, so we don't know when she left. This allegation of discourtesy and improper procedure against Officer Michael Bloom, and allegation of improper procedure against Anand Pupol. Ms. Arias states that she had an incident, a domestic incident with her ex-boyfriend that resulted in her arrest, and that when police arrived, they didn't listen to her side of the story and didn't explain to her why she was being arrested. She added that Officer Bloom was racist, a liar, and that the police report was not accurate. So the CAT report was reviewed, and it did show that the officers were initially dispatched to the domestic dispute, reference a wife hitting the complainant or the subject or the victim, which was on scene. And it was also noted that the children, the juvenile children, were also on scene in the report. Ms. Arias allegedly grabbed her boyfriend's chain around his neck, scratching him, causing him some injury, which he showed to the officers. Both officers did speak to both parties in English and in Spanish. Ms. Arias actually refused to speak in English to Officer Bloom, even though he clarified that he did not speak Spanish. Ms. Arias speaks very fluent in English and in Spanish. She just chose not to speak to him in English, and that's why Officer Pupol had to intervene and basically translate. But in terms of the improper procedure, they spoke to everyone, they conducted the investigation, they obtained the statements, and in accordance with the domestic violence DOs, both officers acted accordingly. So in terms of the allegation of improper procedure against both the officers, staff's recommending exonerating. In terms of Officer Bloom, this incident was captured completely on BWC from both officers, and Officer Bloom was never at any point unprofessional, serious. If anything, it was Ms. Arias just not really treating him very fairly in terms of the language barrier. So in terms of discourtesy, staff recommends exonerating Officer Bloom.
Okay. Any questions from the panel, comment? All right, do I have a motion?
Motion to accept staff recommendation.
I second. All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. And we'll move on to director's review.
Yeah, so we already obviously heard one of the director's review cases. The other one is in the packet as well. Thanks to me agreed with both. The only caveat that we will extrapolate here is that obviously this Jolly's mediation complaints are under direct review, so they can go through the finding. However, if the third officer is identified for counsel, even though it arises out of the same operative fact and case of issue, we will take that complaint and we could offer a mediation again. If she declines it, we will do a traditional investigation as long as it fits within our time requirements per the ordinance. Is that correct? All right. She needs first and a second.
So I'm recusing myself just for the record.
So do I have a motion?
Motion to accept.
Do I have a second?
Yes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
All right, and for the no findings, we have Crystal Bussey, 22-357, or 357, Anonymous, 22-367, Gilbert Mesa, 23-009, FBI Andrew Burnick, 23-011, Detective Mylon, 23-014, Roberto Delgado, 23-017, Alexis Stovall, 23-020, Denise Villar, 23-021, Monica Gonzalez, 23-022, Anonymous, 23-042, Rafael Gomez, 23-045, Crystal Naval, 23-047, Jose Carreras, 23-052, Ramis Herrera, 23-055, Jamie Maduro Caravel, 23-057, Lukenberg Trisant, 23-058, Orlando Cruz, 23-059, Emmanuel Desem, 23-060, Roberto Del Camino, 23-061, Anonymous, 23-063, David Fernandez, 23-064, Lisa Planning, 23-065, Melinda and Lewis, 23-066, Romain Osorio, 23-067, Anonymous, 23-075, and Ogo Ferreira, 23-077. Just need a first and a second to move those.
Do I have a motion?
Motion to accept, no finding recommendations.
Do I have a second? A second. All those in favor? Any opposed?
We also have two requests for extensions found on page 4 of your packets. That's going to be Kavania Chapman, 22-377, and Jorge Pitrin, 22-074. These are just extension requests.
Joe, first, anybody second? Just second. All those in favor? Any opposed?
So that's all of the staff.
There was one more direct review on there.
Yeah, we got both.
Yep.
So public comment.
Yes. So we're open for public forum, and thank you so much for being patient.
Thank you guys for your time. Thank you for having me. Now, am I allowed to ask questions or just comment?
It's public forum, so you can share your thoughts and
Okay, I'm just a little concerned. Am I allowed to speak or not yet?
6:57.
Okay. We'll just let you know, public comment is restricted by our bylaws by 3 minutes.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. All right, thank you guys. So I'm a little concerned. I was wondering what the role of this body is. So once someone gets sustained, an officer's complaint gets sustained, what's the next process? Is he fired? You know, I was also wondering who appoints the body and how can I petition the government to change some of the seats on this body?
All right,
And
Mr. Quick will answer your question.
Mr. Excuse me?
Vicky.
What was your last name? Quick?
QUICK.
All right, thank you.
The CIP is a purely recommending body. It has no authority to discipline or to hire or fire officers. That authority rests with the chief of police. The disciplinary process also is governed by the Police Officers' Bill of Rights, as well as any issues in the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, that might come into play as well. So when the CIP makes a finding of sustained or not sustained, exonerated, whatever it might be, that recommendation gets sent by the CIP, formally sent to the chief of police, and then the chief of police will act upon it as he or she sees fit. In terms of what was your other question, was how is the CIP?
The board selected the panel.
So the panel is made up of 13 panel members. There are 2 from each of the 5 districts within the city of Miami, as well as 1 seat that is appointed by the chief of police. So that's how it's comprised. It goes through, there's a full vetting process that goes through a nominating committee. Ultimately, that gets, a person gets recommended for a seat, and the gets confirmed, like advise and consent type of confirmation from the city commission, and then they're formally on the CIP panel.
Political appointees.
They're not political appointees in the sense that the vetting process is done by the CIP itself. It's different than the other boards. The other boards, the commissioners can appoint whoever they want and can remove them whenever they want. The CIP was set up differently to remove some of that from the some of that discretion from the commission. So the interviewing and the recommendation and the approval is actually done by the CIP itself. And then I liken the commission's role as like the Senate's role with judges in the federal government, which is an advise and consent role. They're not actually doing the interviewing or anything like that. And the recommended person, all of the panel members went through this process, with the exception of the chief's appointee. That one is dealt with differently. They all went through the process and are ultimately chosen by the CIP and put forth to the commission to formally approve that. And that's all set forth in the code, the code that was created by the city when it enacted the legislation for the CIP.
Okay, I just have two more comments.
We're almost out of time.
Well,
Let's do
one more comment. All right, my only other comment is that I filed multiple complaints, and I just feel that it takes a long time to reach you guys. And then once it reaches you guys, nothing happens. You guys make your recommendations, and the police go on with the same old, same old. And I'm also like, what's the point of internal affairs? Like, if it's like looking up your own butt.
Yeah, I was just saying, in terms of the speed, complainants can file directly with the CIP, or it can file with IA, and either way, under the city ordinance, if it's filed directly with the CIP, we notify the IA, and if it's filed directly with IA, they end up notifying the CIP. But if it's filed directly with IA, the CIP doesn't receive it usually until IA is done investigating it. So that might be where some of the lag is. It depends on the process by which the complainant may elect to go. IA's investigations are done in accordance with or are required to be done in accordance with the police officer's Bill of Rights, and those investigations can result in discipline from the chief. And I believe, the major can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that IA does make recommendations to the chief in terms of potential discipline, correct? Or
No.
But ultimately it's the chief's decision regardless, either way.
Actually, once the internal affairs completes an investigation, it goes to the disciplinary review panel. They're the ones, based on the history, profile, disciplinary profile, they come with a form of discipline. Then that discipline goes back and is served to the employee. Now, the employee has certain rights under the 112, including a disciplinary review board. And ultimately, the chief is the one that has makes the final decision what the discipline would be.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you guys for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, do we have any announcements?
No announcements.
So the next complaints committee meeting is May 3rd here in this office.
9 a.m.
The next CIP panel meeting is May 22nd at City Hall.
Good job.
It's been a long week already, it's Tuesday. All right, so do I have a motion to adjourn? Motion to adjourn. Second? All those in favor? Any opposed?